we are recording. So last week, we looked at an overview article about different denominations within Judaism, and then I thought we'd spend the next week or two or three looking at Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox Judaism. I probably mentioned last time that many people will look upon the three movements in Judaism as sort of high octane, medium octane, and low octane, or the idea that, well, we're Reform, we can do whatever we want. I'll just give you a heads up, that's really insulting to Reform rabbis. That is not what Reform Judaism thinks of itself. It may well be what people think of it. So, there's you'll hear jokes saying, this is really Reform. We had ham and cheese on Yom Kippur. But that makes me wince a little bit. So we are going to talk about the history, and we also will talk about what the movement stands for. And as we begin, it will surprise some of you to learn that the Reform movement is the oldest movement per se in Judaism. We are seeing the text, I presume, I hope. Yes. Okay, good. Okay. So this is the website My Jewish Learning, which tends to have short and I think pretty good summaries of important, or maybe they're not important, for me, interesting Jewish issues. So this one is on the history of the Reform movement. So would someone like to read?
I can do it.
Okay, thank you, Bryce.
History of the Reform movement. America's largest Jewish denomination. Reform began in 19th century Germany. Reform Judaism is the largest of the three main American Jewish denominations. The movement's principal North American organization, the Union for Reform Judaism, has roughly 900 member congregations and 1.5 million adherents, and is an affiliate of the international arm of Reform Judaism, the World Union for Progressive Judaism, based in Jerusalem. The URJ operates rabbinical seminaries in 4 cities, 3 in the US and Jerusalem, a network of 16 North American summer camps, an advocacy arm in Washington, D.C., and a national youth group.
Okay, and I'll just add, this is now a little out of date because the seminary in Cincinnati is closing down due to, a wide variety of things, but to save money and not so much interest in people, rabbinic students moving to Cincinnati, and also fewer rabbis enrolling. There is a shortage of rabbis developing. And
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm driving. This is Alan, and if it's okay,
yeah, sure.
if I can just say hello once in a while without doing a digital thing. Technically, I don't think Cincinnati is closing. The rabbinic school is closing. They're not going to ordain rabbis, but the American Jewish Archives and a few other functions at the campus are still going to continue, although that may be not an important point.
Yeah, so the campus is not disappearing. There are, and I think there's controversy about whether the graduate school is going to continue, but there are functions that are going to continue in Cincinnati. But I do believe that they are, not accepting rabbinic students.
That's true. They're not going to accept, and they're not going to ordain, rabbis from Cincinnati anymore.
And so that's quite a change. And just so you know, I was ordained in 2003, so 20 years ago, and I was only the second class that was ordained in Los Angeles. For many, many years, there was a campus in Cincinnati, a campus in New York, a campus in Jerusalem, and a campus in Los Angeles. And the campus in Los Angeles was only a 2-year campus. And so people that went to Los Angeles would then go on to the US-based students to either Cincinnati or New York. And I'll also point out, Alan is the expert on I would say both URJ and the World Union, very active in those organizations. Jane,
And let me
go
add the
ahead.
Cantor part, if I can do that, which is the Cantors are also a 5-year program where they spend the first year in Israel, but the cantorial training program is only in New York.
Right, right, right. And Jane.
I'm just curious if they're not going to take any more people to become rabbis, where?
In Cincinnati. They will still
Right,
be
in
taking them in New York.
Cincinnati.
Yes.
So is it only in New York?
Well, New York and Los Angeles.
In Jerusalem.
Yeah, well,
He meant in the
well, in
US.
Jerusalem, there is a 4-year program in Jerusalem, but that's typically for Israeli rabbis. So,
Right.
so they are ordaining Israeli rabbis, and I would say, you know, those classes are entirely in Hebrew. So the programs really don't intermingle very much.
Okay.
Except the 1 year, right, Rabbi? When you're there for a year, don't
Yes.
you interact with your Israeli rabbinic
Oh yeah, I
students
mean,
for the 1 year?
we would meet people and interact, but it's not common that people will spend, let's say, 2 or 3 years in Israel in that rabbinic program and then come back to Los Angeles or New York. It may happen, but it's not common.
But
And I'll just add the before you, not that you're going to say this, but I'll say it anyway about Cincinnati. There was a great study of where people want to become rabbis and where they want to study. And in the webinar I went to, it was clear that people don't want to go to Cincinnati, even
Right.
if they live in Chicago. They want to go to one of the coasts. So
Right.
even the demand issue isn't where are the candidates. The candidates are all over the country, all over, including Canada.
Right.
But the demand, people don't want to apply in Cincinnati. That was a factor in the decision.
Yeah, and the way the school worked, the school assigns you to a campus. So I very much wanted to be studying in Los Angeles because my family was here. And I was delighted that I was assigned to Los Angeles, but it wasn't, you don't get necessarily a choice. You express a preference, but
That's
you
right.
don't
That's right.
get a choice. Jane, did you
That's
have
right.
something else?
well, my only other question was when you were talking about the oldest, that Reform was the oldest?
Yes, as we will see, before the Reform movement started, there were not movements in Judaism. You were just Jewish. There were seminaries,
Oh, I see.
but there
Okay.
was nothing that resembles what we have today, which is a movement with a particular organization, with a a yeshiva, a rabbinical school. So that level of organization really begins in Germany, as we'll see in the in the 19th century. Stephen.
And I know people who aren't Jewish will say, "Oh, you're Reformed." I go, "No, it's Reform. We haven't done anything wrong to be Reformed."
Yeah. So my line about being reformed is that we're still reforming. If we were reformed with an ED, we'd be done. But
Right.
I think the reason you hear that a lot is there is a Christian denomination called Reformed with an ED. So I think that confusion is natural. Stephen.
Okay.
Math question, sort of. 1.5 million adherents, 900 member congregations. That comes out to almost 1,700 adherents per congregation. And most Reform synagogues I've seen are not nearly that large. I realize some adherents don't belong to any.
Yeah, it's actually a very good idea.
But yeah,
yeah, it's a great math question. I don't have a good math
Restate that, please. I didn't quite understand.
So the article. Stop for a sec. Oh, go ahead.
The question was that it says roughly 900 congregations and 1.5 million adherents. And the question was, that works out to almost 1,700 adherents per congregation. It doesn't mean the average congregation has that many because some adherents don't belong to any congregation, but even so.
I can respond to that. I know what you mean. The answer is the people identify, when they do studies, they ask people, are they Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, or just Jewish or whatever? And when they've done those studies, the Reform movement picks up on that 1.7, 1.8 million it's not all people who are members of the 900 synagogues.
Yeah, that I'm certain that's the answer. Also, when we count members of synagogues in the Jewish world, we count families rather than individuals. But still, I would say, 1,700 individuals, let's say 500 families, or is not an average. I don't know
Yeah,
what the average is,
I
but
never did the math, so I'm enjoying your calculation, but I know the right interpretation is what we're saying. It's about people who call themselves Reform, and
yes.
it's not about membership. Yeah.
And I think, it is typical. I remember a number that about 25% of Jews affiliate with the synagogue. And certainly in some areas it's more, in some areas it's less in terms of a percentage.
That's
But
very geographical. So
yes,
in California, that is the number, but in the Midwest and the East, the affiliation numbers are higher. Not for Reform necessarily. I mean Jewish affiliation. So your answer might be, I don't know what it is for Reform. I know the Federation publishes these numbers, and funny, we're in the California's on the low end
yes.
nationally compared to the Midwest and the East.
Yep. Okay. Bryce, why don't we continue it internationally?
Internationally, the movement is much smaller, encompassing only about 40 communities in Israel and about twice that number in England. Smaller numbers of Reform communities are found in a handful of other European countries. The movement, which was established in Germany in the mid-19th century, was born of an attempt to reconcile Judaism with contemporary life and harmonize it with emerging currents in Western thought. The movement is politically liberal, egalitarian on gender issues, active in interfaith efforts, and religiously progressive, accepting patrilineal descent and ordaining women and gays as rabbis, among other innovations. Historically, it has emphasized the ethical aspects of Jewish tradition over its ritual requirements, though in recent decades it has begun to re-embrace some of the religious practices it once dismissed.
Yeah, I think it's a good summary. I don't know if anyone has.
I'd add a couple of things if I could.
Yeah.
The numbers in Israel for Reform synagogues, when that was written, it was probably a while ago because it's 54 now.
Oh, wow.
Reform synagogues across the state of Israel. And then they didn't put a number on the international that's not Israel, but the World Union numbers are something like 180 or about 80 countries and maybe a couple hundred synagogues, because places like England have more than one, many synagogues, but in a lot of places, in some countries, in small countries, there's only one Reform synagogue, one. Oh, actually, I'm answering it. Maybe am I answering the right question for Reform? I am answering for Reform,
We're
right?
talking about Reform, and
Yeah. Okay. So then the World Union answers are Reform, and so there's about 1,200 synagogues, I believe, across 80 countries that are not Israel and not North America.
Okay. And certainly, and it's sort of uneven. I mean, it's sort of surprised and shocked me that there are no Reform congregations in Mexico.
Randy.
Even though there are a fair number of Jews in Mexico, and I know this because of people interested in having weddings in Mexico. And I remember, working with a couple and saying you probably can do better if you, find a Reform congregation like in Mexico City.
Mexico City. That's probably the only place there's Reform in Mexico, right?
I don't think there is a Reform congregation in Mexico
Really?
City.
Okay, I thought that. Okay,
so it is definitely uneven and growing. And the movement in Israel is for Israelis who consider themselves secular, but want to have some connection with Jewish ritual, and don't and really can't abide by I would say, the strictness of the Orthodox movement. So the Reform movement has been a way for Israelis to have a connection with Jewish ritual and synagogue life, Of course, the role in the U.S. is very different. Anyway, I won't belabor the point. Patrilineal descent is a very important issue, and my understanding of it is that it's only North American Reform Judaism that recognizes patrilineal descent. The rule on patrilineal descent is that the child of a Jew and a non-Jew will be presumed to be Jewish, and that presumption is then confirmed by the child going through Jewish ritual as they grow up. So what would Jewish ritual would be? It would be, circumcision, a ritual circumcision, and Hebrew namings for boys, and similar ceremonies,
Well,
obviously without the cutting, for girls, for going to Hebrew school, bar and bat mitzvah, and so on. So
life cycle stuff.
life cycle, yes.
Yeah.
And so we're in the interesting situation where, as I think you may know, let's say you have a non-Jewish man married to a Jewish woman. All of the Jewish movements, with the exception of North American Reform Judaism, would recognize children as Jewish, irrespective of how they were raised. It's sort of ironic, and for me interesting, that a Reform rabbi might say this child is not Jewish, even though that person would be accepted as Jewish by the Orthodox and conservative movements. And that's sort of an interesting oddity, and it comes up all the time. I will have typically an adult come to me and say, my mother was Jewish, my father was not Jewish, we were raised either Christian or nothing. What am I? And I would say, by Orthodox and conservative standards, you are Jewish. By the Reform resolutions in North America, you would not be considered Jewish. And then I tend to be, flexible in this regard, as I am in most regards. And I think this idea comes out of the idea, which is central to Reform Judaism, which is to say that we treat the genders as equally as possible. Therefore, we would not attribute a special relationship to women as a parent versus men, Jewish men as a parent. So that's where we get this patrilineal descent.
So, Rabbi, my understanding, and I'm not 100% sure, is that the Canadian Reform branch of North America does not recognize patrilineal descent. That is not to say that a Reform rabbi in Toronto
so the answer is I'm not certain. My impression is that this is a resolution of the CCAR, which includes Canadian congregations.
Okay.
So the official position, which may or may not be what individual rabbis do, but the official position of the CCAR is to recognize patrilineal descent.
I was with some Canadians when I was in Toronto, and so it's not an official statement, but when we discussed that, I was told, "Oh no, the Canadian Reform."
Yeah, so I think that's the answer. In the same way that the CCAR does not, I don't know exactly the language to use, but the CCAR is opposed to interfaith marriage, but leaves to individual rabbis the decision as to whether or not to officiate at an interfaith wedding. But the official position of the CCAR is to be opposed to such weddings. Stephen.
You said about that it was to treat the two genders the same, but you also mentioned circumcision for males and not for females.
Yes, because circumcision doesn't exist for females. There is something called a clitorectomy, which is sometimes mislabeled circumcision, but it's not circumcision.
No, the question is, if they wanted to treat the genders the same, why they did not scrap circumcision in order to not have male-only rituals.
It's a very good question.
Excellent question.
It's an excellent question, and I think it reflects the depth of attachment by Judaism to circumcision. And I absolutely agree with the supposition when you think about the things that Reform Judaism made optional, and many Reform rabbis don't practice. So many Reform rabbis will not insist on preaching that we should be keep kosher, that we should pray 3 times a day, that you should wear a yarmulke and a talit during services, and so on and so on and so on. So a lot of ritual stuff. I don't know a single Reform rabbi that doesn't endorse circumcision for baby boys. I know many Reform rabbis who won't necessarily insist upon it. You may have a couple that just for aesthetic reasons or other reasons will say, well, we're not circumcising our sons. And I don't think the Reform rabbi would, excommunicate them or refuse to allow them in the synagogue. But I don't know a single Reform rabbi who is opposed to circumcision. Bryce.
Yeah, not to get too graphic, I'll try to restrain this, but there is an analogous surgical procedure to removing the male foreskin for the female. There's a clitoral hood that covers the clitoris, but you could remove that and it would leave the clitoris unprotected, just as the male's penis is then unprotected. So that would be analogous, but I don't see anyone proposing it.
No, I've never seen anyone proposing it. Nor have I seen any sort of blood-related rituals associated with conversion for women.
Here's the opportunity for innovation.
Yeah, and I don't see any demand for it. There are real issues, and I don't remember where the responsa has come down on this. If you have a transgender candidate for conversion, and the person considers, I wouldn't laugh at it. And then the person considers.
No, I just mean the conundrum is amazing.
Yeah, so no, it's a real question. So if the person considers themselves female, but hasn't had surgical intervention, so you have a candidate that considers herself a female, but has a penis, do you have a circumcision of the penis? Do you draw a drop of blood if the penis is already circumcised? And I believe there is an answer. I don't know what the answer is. So far, it has not come up in my world of conversions. But I know that this is the transgender issue is one that is taken very seriously in the Reform movement. And I've had transgenders conversions, and so the only thing that I've been exposed to, it typically when you're converted, your name becomes, let's say you take the name Rachel, your name would be Rachel, and then typically it's Bat Avraham v'Sarah, Rachel, daughter of Abraham and Sarah, or if it's Moshe ben Avraham v'Sarah. So suppose you don't align with any gender. So it turns out that's an easy one to solve. And so it would be, let's say, Rachel mi beit Avraham v'Sarah. So Rachel from the house of, or from the family of Abraham and Sarah. So you don't have to specify a gender. Okay, let's press on. Origins in Germany. Bryce, if you don't mind.
The origins in Germany, the backdrop to the movement's emergence was the emancipation, a process begun in late 18th century to grant European Jews equal rights and eliminate the legal barriers that had impeded their social and economic progress for centuries. The emergence from the European ghetto had an enormous impact on the practice of Judaism, leading some Jews to abandon long-observed religious practices in an effort to assimilate more easily into the broader culture. Eager to participate and demonstrate to their neighbors what loyal and productive citizens they could be, many Jews decided to jettison kashrut, Jewish dietary laws, and other traditional laws and practices which prohibited them from eating at the homes of their Gentile friends or attending social gatherings at cafes. The Reform Rabbi Lawrence Englander has written in an essay on the movement's origins. They were embarrassed, too, should neighbors accustomed to the decorum of the Protestant or Catholic Church visit the synagogue and witness a spectacle of men wrapped in strange prayer shawls, noisily davening, praying a repetitive liturgy while children tore up and down the aisles.
Let me just see. Okay, rather than pressing on, Lois.
Yeah, I had a question about patrilineal, which the way you described is different than I understood, so I feel educated. Thank you. But what if you were raised Jewish and neither parent was born Jewish? Does Reform consider that person Jewish?
No. I would say
Yes.
the answer was no.
Oh, no. So you have to be raised Jewish, but you also have to have one parent who is Jewish.
Yes. So the understanding is, and this is going to come up in the discussion on the history, is Judaism understands itself as being part of a nation. And so you are typically born into your nationality. You know, if you're born in Ireland, you're Irish. Even if you don't like, beer and don't celebrate St. Patrick's Day and you're Jewish, you're still Irish. So in the same way, if you're born into Judaism, you're Jewish. I often say that Judaism is the sole surviving example of a time in which your nationality and your religion were one and the same. In ancient times, if you were Egyptian, you worshiped the Egyptian gods. If you were Babylonian, you worship Babylonian gods. If you were an Israelite, you worship the Israelite God. The world changed, and religion became a matter of belief rather than nationality. So what we have, and we're going to see more discussion on this, is that in Germany in the 18th century, the issue becomes, how am I supposed to be, or how is it possible for me to be both Jewish and German, or Jewish and French? And Reform Judaism is going to be an answer to that. But none of the movements would suggest that you automatically become Jewish based on your beliefs or your upbringing. There has to be, if neither parent is Jewish, there has to be some sort of formal conversion into the group. Okay?
But the rule about practicing or ritual, what you call Jewish ritual,
Right.
is only applies if your father?
No, father or mother. So if you have one Jewish parent and one non-Jewish parent, you're presumed to be Jewish, and that presumption is confirmed by being raised Jewishly.
And if you're not raised Jewishly, they don't consider you Jewish?
So according to the CCAR regulation, okay, remember this is being recorded, you could have, and I've had, I would say, a good half dozen or more people come to me and say, we've discovered that my maternal grandmother was Jewish, therefore my mother is Jewish, but my mother and maybe even my grandmother were married to non-Jews. So in that case, according to Orthodox and conservative Judaism, the person I'm talking to would be considered Jewish. In theory, the Reform resolution would say that person is not Jewish.
So Rabbi Madeleine Albright was not Jewish by this logic.
No, that's incorrect. Both her parents were Jewish. They converted after she was born.
But
yeah, are they? Is this?
And it actually wouldn't matter whether they converted before or after she was born. If her mother was born Jewish. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so Madeleine Albright's parents were, I would say if both parents are Jewish, the issue about how the person is raised disappears.
That is crazy.
No, I get it. That's the point, because she didn't know that her parents were Jewish when she was growing up, right? Yeah, that was, but your point.
She herself was not raised Jewish, even though both her parents were Jews.
Yeah, she's not Jewish.
Do they just go by the religion of the mother and the mother's husband, or do they require a DNA test to verify? identified
DNA
who his
has
father
nothing to do
actually
with this. I
is.
get into this discussion all the time. DNA has nothing to do with this.
That wasn't
Which
no,
is
you
why,
didn't hear the question.
which is why the child of a surrogate parent that is not Jewish, okay, even though the couple that made the zygote to implant in the not Jewish mother, that child is not Jewish, even though both the parents biologically are.
So that is an oddity. And Lois, if you think the other stuff is crazy, you're going to think this is crazier.
Yeah,
Hold on. Under Jewish law, let's say a woman can't, has had a hysterectomy and she can't have a child, but she can produce eggs, and she's Jewish. Her husband can produce sperm, and he's Jewish. They fertilize the egg in vitro and implant it in the womb of a woman who is not Jewish. And the answer is, in traditional Judaism, it's the womb of the mother that counts. Since they didn't have DNA testing, they didn't have in vitro fertilization, you could swear to your blue in the face that, I don't know how that egg got inside of me. The rules for, 2,000 years of rabbinic Judaism, it's basically the womb that determines. I'm not 100% sure how Reform Judaism would address it, but I can tell you, I've participated in a Beit Din, which converted a newborn baby that is exactly that issue. And it's just easier to do a little pro forma conversion, and then you don't have to wonder whether the child is Jewish or not. But remember, we're dealing with Jewish laws of nationality and identity, and it's not what you believe, and it's not how you feel. In Jewish law, it's what the law says. And I have many conversations with people about this, that identify with Judaism, that go to, synagogues and are welcome in synagogues, but there is a legal question about whether or not you're Jewish, and the legal question relates to the legal issues. Are you bound by Jewish law? Is eating a ham sandwich lunch, or is it a violation of Jewish law? If you're Jewish, it's a violation of Jewish law.
Yeah, but what Reform has done, according to this conversation, is sort of bleed into the belief idea by making it on behavior one of the criteria.
Yes, and that's why this is the most controversial, and I wouldn't necessarily use the term destructive, but the most controversial and, from the traditional world, offensive thing that Reform has done, because it opens up the issue, which is exactly what you're saying, and that's why it was not an easy decision to make.
Yeah, I thought that they made it to make up for the fact that they were going to agree that patrilineal was as valid as matrilineal, and I personally agreed with them on the pure substance of it, but my concern has always been that you create two different strains of who's Jewish, even within the American Jewish community.
Yes, and you're absolutely correct. So you can have someone, let's say Jewish father, non-Jewish mother, raised Jewishly, a member of the synagogue, very interested in Judaism, bar mitzvah. That child shows up at a conservative Jewish camp and they're not admitted. Or that child shows up to get married, and if the rabbi is checking on their origins, that rabbi is not going to recognize that person as Jewish. They go to Israel, they can get to Israel under the political law of return, but when it comes time to get married, they would not be considered Jewish. They can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. So, as I think about exactly what you're saying, maybe with computers this isn't an issue, but if you look ahead, let's say several hundred years, no one will know whether their chain of tradition was strictly matrilineal, or whether there might have been a reform set of parents somewhere in there. So everyone will be suspect. And my guess is that it will become just a ritual of birth to have a pro forma conversion, even in the Orthodox world. But that's my own speculation. Erwin, Stephen, and then Alan. Erwin.
Yes, I would like to ask you that this Reform Rabbi Lawrence Englander,
Is he the author?
you know,
Oh,
what
no,
we
he wrote an
read
article.
that the participants and demonstrate their neighbors with loyal to productive citizens. I can name you 3 major cities in the world: Budapest, Italy, Rome, Florence, and even Montreal, Canada, where the Jews lived in their neighborhood, and they never moved out to participate in Christian neighborhoods or whatever. And you know, it's Budapest was
Okay.
always
Yeah.
lived in
So I mean, there are
yeah.
Jews.
So
There are Jews, Orthodox Jews, that never
not
felt
only
that never.
not only Orthodox Jews, not only Orthodox Jews. And I give you an example. When we moved from Montreal to Los Angeles to Thousand Oaks, when we were at the temple, the first thing my wife asked the rabbi, where is the Jewish neighborhood in Thousand Oaks? Because
Yeah.
that's
So
all
anyway,
we were
Erwin, I'm not
brought up.
disputing. I'm not disputing. Individual
I-
activities. What I'm saying is Reform Judah. What Englander is saying, and what I think is part of history, is the reason Reform Judaism was born was because in the mid 18th century, a completely new phenomenon occurred. And that new phenomenon was that nations were accepting Jews as citizens. When Jews were off on the side, and both the Jews and the nation in which they lived understood that the Jews aren't citizens, they're a separate nation living within the nation, there was no problem. When Jews are now being accepted as citizens and can be admitted to universities and can be admitted into business and so on, the issue is, how do we still be Jewish, but be allowed to remove the barriers of participation in a larger society? So some of the barriers would be keeping strictly kosher, and working on Shabbat. So Reform Judaism was born in response to that quest to mingle into the larger society. It certainly didn't occur everywhere, but that's where Reform developed. Stephen.
I don't know. I really don't know where
Even
this. I guess this, but my 2 uncles who were Jewish, they were never admitted to the University of Budapest because they were Jewish,
I understand, but I'm
and
not
they
talking.
lived in a ghetto. And they lived in a
Right,
ghetto.
right. So it didn't happen everywhere to everyone, but in Germany and in France, Jews were admitted into the larger society. There was still a lot of discrimination, but the Reform movement was a response to that. Stephen.
So, in going by patrilineal or partially patrilineal, do you look at just, is the mother Jewish and is her husband Jewish, or do you go a step further of trying to determine whether her husband is really the biological father?
Well, you're talking about in the Reform movement?
Yeah, because of the others, it doesn't matter.
So I accept the parents' word on this. I don't check. I don't insist on a paternity test. It's conceivable to me that rabbis would, but I would be shocked and surprised. I mean, if I went to a synagogue and the rabbi insisted on a paternity test to prove whether I was really the father of my children, I would not go to that synagogue. Alan.
So my question has to do with halacha and custom and time and evolution. For example, I believe it was an early decision of the Reform movement to not make halacha binding like the other movements require. Even forgetting individual practices might violate that. It's been the Reform movement definition is halacha plays a role, and if it makes sense to you, you follow it, and if it doesn't, it's
Yeah,
not binding.
I don't
in the
think
same
there
way.
are official legal words to the effect of what you're saying.
Okay,
Some of
well,
the-
I've had rabbis say that many times, but I not
Yes,
disagree.
I understand.
The related thing is that the mother is the mother of the child is of a Jew, or the son, child of a. This is this a halacha thing, or is this a practice, a custom? For example, what I understand is biblically, the Jewishness was passed from the father to the son. That's why we have the Kohans. But in the Middle Ages or early after the Talmudic, whatever period, the rules changed and
Right.
it became maternal.
Right.
Is that a
Right.
halakha thing, or is it a
Right,
custom?
no, that is a halacha thing, and
Okay,
it's Talmudic. So in biblical times, your tribe went with your father,
right.
and there were no conversions, and there was no issue of whether you're Jewish or not. The issue is what tribe do you belong to? So
Okay.
the best example of that is Joseph's two sons.
Right.
Joseph is married to the daughter of an Egyptian priest named Osnat, and his two sons, their two sons, become heads of tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. And there's never any question about whether they are Jewish. If you read the Midrash, of course, Osnat converted to Judaism, but there was no conversion in the time of Joseph. But the rabbis of the Talmud go through, I think, a very difficult bit of logic to prove that it should go with the mother's line. But I think the real reason for having it go with the mother's line is that while you may not know who the father of a child is, you always know who the mother of a child is, and you have to know whether you are Jewish or not Jewish. There's no such
Almost
thing as
always. Occasionally, you have issues of babies getting switched at the hospital or
Yeah,
whatever.
I'm not talking about babies being switched at the hospital. I'm talking about Talmudic times. So there's and there's no such thing as being half Jewish. I often joke, if you're half Jewish, does that mean you can eat half a ham sandwich? What does that mean? So either you're Jewish or you're not Jewish.
So,
But it's Talmudic, and it's halachic, and it's legal.
The
okay,
case
good.
where King Solomon threatened to split the baby in half because to sell the argument about which mother was the real mother.
Right.
I don't know what relation the women were, but in that sort of a scenario, you could have a situation where one woman is Jewish and the other's not, and they dispute who's
I will not comment
the
on
baby
that.
belongs
Bryce.
to.
Yeah, so Mike, I wanted to make a comment, and this is about the potential rise of like the situation in Europe, where the de-ghettoization of Europe, or partial de-ghettoization, it was never complete. But one of the potential legal issues which might have occurred to the nations, to the governments of the nations, is who is sovereign in that territory. You see, to say it's a separate enclave and a different nation, the king of France or whatever is looking at this and saying, that's not a separate nation, that's my nation, France, and I own it.
Yes. So
And
my impression,
maybe
maybe Jerry has more information on this, but in these times, let's say feudal times, there were Jews. Jews were understood to be a separate nation, but that separate nation lived under the rule of the king of England or whatever, and was taxed as a nation and was treated as a nation. They were not treated as individuals. That's my impression. Jerry, I don't know if you have my.
Okay, if Alan, you got something related, or do you want to jump back? Or
Well, I wanted to finish, if I could, the what I think of the custom halakha, and the third thing was timing. So the Reform movement added this patrilineal descent only in the 1990s through the
Oh
initiative.
no, I think it's in the 60s.
All right. Well, whenever they did it, it wasn't it wasn't when it was founded, although I thought it was
Correct.
behind Rabbi Alexander Schindler's motivation, which would have been a little later.
No,
But my thinking, if I'm wrong, is I think it was in response to addressing interfaith and mixed marriages in a way to make families feel more comfortable, that to allow the movement could deal with the interfaith families. Does that seem relevant at all?
it seems relevant. I don't know what the issues were at the time the CCAR voted on it.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't realize it was that early either.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you. Okay. I'm done. Go.
It's earlier.
Yeah.
Jerry.
Jerry, go ahead. Thanks.
Oh, no, sure. Rabbi, what was it, just to rephrase the question?
So my understanding is pre-Enlightenment, Jews were understood to be a nation living within another nation. And so, you know, Bryce was making the point that if you were the King of England, you had sovereignty among the Jews and the non-Jews, but the Jews were understood to be a community and was taxed as a community. And the King of England was not imposing necessarily English law upon that community. They were happy to have the Jews operate as a nation living amongst another nation. Whoa, I am losing power. Just in case I lose it.
No, that's all right. You're good. You're good. That's we probably need about 2 hours to answer that.
Okay. So anyway,
sorry.
No, but that's my general impression. Different than the Sephardic world.
I would agree, except for I would say, can I modify with two caveats?
Sure.
One, while it lasted in any given place, right? Because very often that, you were asked to pick up and leave all of a sudden.
Right.
So, if we're talking about Europe, in general,
right?
Not just England, let's say Europe in general. But also it was similar to the environment that the Jews had established even back in Roman times, where they had some local authority, but not, overall authority, and definitely not authority in anything intercommunity, right? They had authority in their own community. And then, for example, they never had authority over things like capital punishment cases and things like that. Those were, adjudicated at a higher level. So, and that kind of worked. And that system carried over into the Mediterranean, into the Greek, up to the Black Sea, then out to Portugal, Spain, back up to Germany. And, but there was a lot of moving around. So there was always some local control. But then again, at any time, it could be just taken away. And very often it was. So, I'll leave it at that. And, maybe maybe that's a separate program sometime.
Yeah.
If you want
But think about France. With the French Revolution, the king is overturned, and there's liberty, fraternity, equality.
Yeah.
And so the question is, are Jews part of that, or are Jews still a separate little nation? One of the things
they were,
yes.
But as a matter of fact, I think if you're lucky enough to go see this new Napoleon movie, you'll see something about how Napoleon actually was really wanted to bring Jewish ideals to France and even Jewish law. But we know how that worked out for Napoleon. So,
right.
Right.
And so one of the things that we heard with this, Israeli tour guide, who is certainly more knowledgeable in these areas than am I, is he said, we have a concept, and we often talk about this, about being a Jewish American or an American Jew in this country. Mid 1800s, that concept didn't exist. No Jew would consider themselves a French Jew or a German Jew or a Polish Jew or a Hungarian Jew. If you go mid 19th century, the Jews would just consider themselves Jews. They would not consider themselves part of the nation which they happen to find themselves geographically. And I'll take his word on it. Erwin.
Yeah, I just want to remind you that before the Jews were living in Trastevere outside of Rome as I guess a nation or something, but they had nothing to do with Italian community. And when Garibaldi united Italy, then I guess they became Italians, but they still remained in the ghetto in Trastevere.
Right. So I don't know anything about that, but it sounds very similar to what this article is saying. Let's read a little.
Rabbi, can I just
Go
add
ahead.
one quick point?
Sure.
Sorry, so just relative to this, I don't know if you this important this week. You know, something Henry Kissinger once said when talking to Golda Meir, right? He said that he considered himself an American first, Secretary of State second, and a Jew third. And then Golda Meir said, "Well, you know, Henry, in Israel, we read, you know, right to left."
Right
so.
to left. Yes. Very cute comment.
All right, you know that quote. Okay.
Yes, I do know that quote. And by the way, the movie Golda is very, very good. And I highly recommend it. It's the one that came out within the last year. And it talks about how close Israel was to annihilation in the Yom Kippur War. Jay?
It's very relevant to the events of
Yes.
since October 7th. For
Yes.
Remarkably similar in terms of how making difficult intelligence decisions are made then and now.
Right. Right. Yes. Jay?
Yeah, I find this very interesting, especially this talk about the Jewish nation in the 18th and 19th century. Today, I would like to know if the people watching this program consider themselves American Jews or Jewish Americans.
Yeah. Let me ask it this way. How many of you think there is a difference between saying you're an American Jew or a Jewish American? If you think there's a difference between those two things, raise your hand. A substantive difference. I understand you do, Jay, and I guess iPhone 13 does too. I'm not sure who that is, but I'm not sure. I actually personally don't understand the difference. I consider myself a member of both groups, and as long as there's not a conflict between the two groups, there's nothing that I would do or not do which would make one over the other. iPhone 13, if you are raising your hand.
When there is a conflict.
Hold on, Stephen, I'm sorry. I don't know if you were raising your hand. I don't know who iPhone 13 is, but if you wanted to chime in, please do. But you're muted and literally hearing nothing. Alan.
So let me see if I'm muted. I'm not muted. It's not necessarily which word comes first, but one of the things that has come up in a controversial and maybe anti-Semitic way is whether you have this dual loyalty where you're more loyal to being Jewish or to Israel than you are to being American. But it doesn't answer the question.
So you mentioned two words: dual loyalty and more loyal one way or the other. So, and I know it's sometimes used as an anti-Semitic trope that Jews have a dual loyalty, but I think it's true. I absolutely have a dual loyalty to Israel and to the United States.
It's a generalization.
I'm sorry?
It's a generalization.
What does that mean?
I don't know what you mean by that.
What
Jerry.
I'm saying is it's often been applied to all Jews, speaking for everyone's opinions, which is obviously a generalization.
Yes, I mean, clearly that's true. I do know of a woman in my congregation who was working in, I guess, in an area where she was, she was cleared for secret work, and she was actually, she had dual citizenship, Israeli citizenship and U.S. citizenship, and her clearances were canceled for sensitive U.S. work, clearly because of her Israeli citizenship.
Well, that makes sense.
So anyway, whether it makes sense or not, but it clearly happened. But I would absolutely say that I consider myself both a member of as an American and a member of Am Yisrael, the people Israel. That doesn't mean that I am necessarily have specific loyalty to the state of Israel. I care passionately what happens in Israel. I'm not an Israeli citizen. I don't carry an Israeli passport. But Judaism is both a nationality and the
And of
religion,
people.
and there aren't other, to my knowledge, there aren't other examples of that. So it's sort of unique, and it causes confusion and controversy. Okay, we got through page 1. Almost. So, you know, either you like this or you don't like this. I mean, you know, I think reading these articles raise questions, and people ask questions, and I bet Lois agrees you got some clarification on what you thought was simple, and it's not so simple. But anyway, that to me is the goal of conducting these kinds of discussions the way I conduct them. I mean, I know some people that are members of Temple Adat Elohim Men's Torah Study that say, you know, you send out an article, we can read the article. Why do we have to sit and listen to a discussion? Well, this is the reason. Alan.
I was just going to come back to something that everyone focused on, Rabbi Lawrence Englander. This is to Erwin or anybody. If you have reactions or comments, opinions, I know him. He's actually a Canadian rabbi in Toronto, and so I could facilitate a continued discussion, Erwin, if there's something about that we didn't finish here.
Yeah, I mean, I think Erwin is pointing to cases, individual cases, where you didn't need to start a new movement to have feet in both worlds. And that is very true in the Muslim world, in the Jewish Sephardic world, where the movements never took hold. So, you know, I was at a Sephardic wedding in Paris this summer, and I went to a Sephardic synagogue, and I know families that, you know, are pretty observant, at least in terms of going to synagogue and keeping kosher, but they're not observant in many ways. So the movements didn't take place in the Sephardic world, but only the Ashkenazi world. And it's a little after 8, so I won't keep you any further. I am going to.
I hope you feel better, Rabbi. I hope
Yeah,
you're
I
on the mend.
I am doing better all the time. I don't know where to stop recording.
Actually connect.